If you've watched the Ahsoka trailer, you'll notice that for a brief moment you get a glimpse of the Phantom 2 from Star Wars Rebels. Seeing that, I decided to make my own 1/12 scale replica of it. Not necessarily completely accurate. We'll find out more when the live action happens, but here's how I built it. I started with a image that I found online that I brought into SolidWorks, and I scaled it to be approximately 1/12 the scale of what the Phantom's supposed to be. The Phantom's supposed to be about 14.5 meters long. When I got done scaling it, it came out to just under 4 feet. It's a little over 4 feet with the rear door open. So I started by printing the front section, and I made a couple of little panels and greeblies to go inside. Hindsight on this part, which you'll find I have a lot of hindsights in this project, was I should have painted what you see me putting in before I assembled the cockpit and nose, because I quickly put the cockpit together to see what it would look like, not thinking I completely glued it together. Came together great, it just made it really hard to paint it after the fact. Here I'm using epoxy sculpt to fill in somewhat wider gap than normal. That's usually, not usually, but I think that came from a little bit of warpage based on the size of the part. Eventually I plan on putting a window in the cockpit. I have not done that even as part of this build, partially because it makes it hard to get the characters in and out. For a little kid, it won't be too big of a deal, because here you see the second section has a door that goes all the way through. They can reach into the cockpit from this section. I can reach in, but it gets a little tight. I'm using modeling paste here to fill the gaps because they're not as big as the gap on the nose. I used 1/4-inch wood dowels to line up the next pieces. I should have done this on every piece. I've gone back and updated my model to have dowels, but I didn't reprint parts. This project already has a little over 6 spools of PLA plastic to assemble it. I have the dowels going from front to back, and I didn't have dowels on this section for the two pieces going together. I have, again, updated the model. If enough people are interested, I may actually put the model out as is for anyone to manipulate and make their own. So the top section here in the back actually had a few mishaps. The first piece on the left has a little warpage that I had to deal with, and the piece on the right you can see never finished printing, so I had to measure and fit another piece in to get it to actually work right. While that was printing, I moved on to painting the inside of the cockpit, and quickly realized my error of not pre-painting these pieces before I glued them all in place. It's not the tightest of areas, but it's definitely not easy to get in and paint in an area that's already been glued together. Next, I moved on to my failed attempt of putting in a windshield. The problem is the plastic that I'm using here is way too thick, and it gave way and broke after I had glued it in place. It just didn't stay. It actually cracked. I have some ideas for the future. Based on getting the characters in and out, it wasn't worth finishing it for this project. The weather was cooperating with the wind on this day, so I decided to use filler primer to paint the rear hatch. And then I brought it inside and I painted it a metallic silver color, and then went in and started to put some weathering in. Then I painted it with this light drab green, and then came back with a slightly brighter green, trying to give it a weathered and look that it's been well used. So the door is going to actually open and close, and it's hinged using skewers that I got from the dollar store. I had already pre-sized the skewer before I painted it to make sure it would work, and here I'm just putting in the pieces that I had already pre-sized. So I then go and I press it in place. This is a press fit. And then now I have the part that I was printing to fix my printing error. I print with 3 layers, which feels like it gives enough to actually do a glue to fix an issue like this. I mean, if it's just going to be on display, that's probably going to be fine. But if I do give this to a nephew or even a niece to play with, it needs a little more stability than that. So I make sure that I clamp it well and let it glue. I make sure I get the entire seam on the inside. And here, when I push the back piece up, you can see the gap that was caused by the warpage. Nothing a little epoxy sculpt can't fix. I like using epoxy sculpt because it has a 3-hour work time, and it seems like it actually gets softer as you use it over that 3 hours. Then after that, all bets are off. You might as well just stop. It's kind of like Bondo. It starts to get brittle, and you just need to leave it alone for about 24 hours. Then it becomes extremely sandable. Then I move on to doing a prime coat of modeling paste. I try to put this on as thin as possible because it'll fill in the seams, and the thicker it is, it will shrink a little, but if you put it on thin, you don't notice the shrinkage. It's sandable. I like the way it sands. It seems to give, and I like that it's non-toxic. I don't have to use acetone to, make it a little more easy to work with. It's kind of like joint compound. It has a decent work time, but if you're going to be doing it for more than 5-10 minutes, you probably want to close the lid on the canister because it does start to dry out. Then once that was dried, I flipped it over, and playing with one of my new toys, I decided to add a little more reinforcement, especially being how this piece went together. I would say wear some protection while doing this part. The fumes are probably not very good for you. I am wearing a N95 mask. I'm using the mask that I spray paint with. I don't know if it's good, if it's efficient enough, but that's what I'm using here. I know the green doesn't match the color they use in the cartoon, but it seemed a little closer to what the ship looked like in the split second it was in the trailer. Plus, I'm partial to greens and browns of the Star Wars universe. I don't know why, but I seem to gravitate towards those colors. So I mask off the wings and I paint them. And then I start masking off to put the accent. The accent's going to be yellow, but before I put it on, I decide to create some chipping so that the yellow looks weathered. The green's not going to look weathered, but I think it would be weird to see the green chipping off to see the white. I feel like this section would have been a darker color from the beginning. I'm using liquid latex masking. I also use just liquid latex for that you can get at Halloween as well. I have both. This was gotten for me as a gift, and so I'm using it. I think the Halloween liquid latex is like a fraction of the cost for 3 times the amount. So I wait for that to dry, and then I start to accent color with yellow. Here I get kind of lazy and I just spread the yellow right out onto the ship rather than actually getting a palette to work with. Hey, I saved a paper plate, right? Then after it dried, I go in and I just make sure that there's any section that the green's showing a little too much through, and I kind of touch up. And then I do some to the front edge of the back section. This green tape is called frog tape, and it actually recommends that you pull it off while the part is wet. It says that it works great. I find that whether I wait till it dries or do it wet, it does actually do good. The issue with pulling it off wet is if you're not careful, you can, depending on how wet it is, you can actually start to splatter paint in areas that you don't want painted. I like that because I painted the masking over the tape. It actually pulls some of the masking up and helps me find where I want to actually do some cleanup to get the weather look. Now the ship's not a perfect one panel, so I'm just taking one of my drafting pencils and drawing some lines. This actually came out okay, and I probably should have left it like this, but then I went in and took a marker to it and it looked worse. So I went back over with paint to lighten it up before deciding to try to paint the Phantom logo on there. And 2 things. The logo was too small, and I was in too much of a hurry and did not let sections dry before trying to go to the next section. And that happened. So I decided to go make a larger version, but this time I decided that I'm just going to actually use the vinyl as the logo. I'm not going to paint the logo. I'm just going to layer these 4 colors from the vinyl onto my print. I think it looks a lot better, and I'm very happy with the way it came out, and I made a mirror image for the other side as well, of course. Moving on to the rear thrusters, I had some yellow blinking lights that I wired up in series. Yeah, don't get mad at me, I prefer series because the lights are brighter. Yes, I know the battery won't last as long. Once I proved my concept with the first wire harness, I made the second wire harness. Each one is using 11 lights. And here you can see what it looks like with the top open. And just a quick setup showing what it would look like out in the wild. If you've made it this far, thanks for watching, and hope you got something out of this.